I feel like this video needs no context or introduction because, borrowing from one of the chapters that will come up later, this is a tale as old as time. But really, just under 20 years or so.
Do people assume all your problems got solved because a big strong man showed up?
I make no secret of the fact that I have nothing but loathing for the variety of bad faith criticism that exploded onto the internet in the late 2000s. The Cracked.com articles whose comedy was always mean-spirited and only occasionally onto something. The Channel Awesome videos featuring bitter Gen Xers complaining that their hands weren't being held throughout the entire movie. The feminist frequency content full of research mistakes and misrepresentations. But this is making me sound way too noble in my cause. My nerd rage stems from article after article calling the Disney princesses problematic. And that is low-hanging fruit that will never be unbruised. Snow White has no personality besides being nice. Cinderella just cleans when she should be girl-bossing. Aurora falls for a man who kisses her without her consent. Ariel has the audacity to make a major lifestyle change that she already wanted because it results in her getting a man. Belle totally has this thing called Stockholm Syndrome that wasn't just made up by a biased Swedish psychiatrist. Jasmine dares to get married. Pocahontas is too preachy. Mulan has to become a man to succeed. Criticisms tend to stop at Rapunzel, and thank heavens, because anyone who comes after this gal is gonna wake up breathing through a tube.
I see how it is.
Anyway, this video is one that has been brewing in my head for years, and I didn't think it needed to be done since in my naive optimism, I like to believe that society has moved past scapegoating friggin' princess characters in harmless movies made for children as bad role models, but I still see memes that are really determined to misrepresent what I consider the first collection of strong female characters that I say with complete sincerity I was exposed to, and were actually role models and heavy influences on me. But I was really inspired by my friends Liana and Song hosting their podcast Two Women Talking with a guest called Derwin, where they talk about how most of the Disney princesses are actually quite subversive.
Let's face it, the Disney princesses were, they'd be called woke now.
So internet, if you want to mess with my girls, make space on tonight's dinner plate for both your words and my receipts. First off, I am not going to give Rachel Zegler a hard time for certain poorly worded comments in interviews that were most likely given to her by a PR department who wants to push the pop feminist angle to get people to see the remake, and I will also say that I'm aware the voice can be a bit of a deal breaker. I personally love Adriana Casalotti's voice, and without fail I always smile whenever she starts off Whistle While You Work, but I fully admit that it's a preference issue, and if you don't like, you don't like. What I do take issue with are the claims that Snow White has no personality, just cooks and cleans, or has to be rescued, which are all used to accuse her of being the dreaded problematic. So let's run down this character's backstory and situation. Dead mother, dead father, narcissistic stepmother who needs external validation from a talking mirror, and being made to dress in rags and clean this honking castle every day. She's accused of having no personality because she's sweet, and Quoth One review, sweetness isn't a personality, it's a flavoring. Okay, Snow White is clearly an optimist, and that's not really headcanon because her first song in the movie has her state that she's wishing for someone to come and take her away from this situation, which indicates that she's dreaming and choosing to adopt a positive outlook on life because that's the only way she can get through this lonely existence. And sweetness and kindness aren't the only personality traits she displays in the film.
I don't understand.
She's mad, jealous of you. She'll stop at nothing.
But who?
The Queen.
The Queen?
She's understandably and realistically terrified when she's informed that her stepmother ordered her death and now she has to fend for herself in the forest. She's practically minded when she sees the dwarf's cottage in such a state and thinks it could use fixing up. She's stern with the dwarves when she sees they haven't washed before supper, and she's uneasy with the Queen when she's in disguise and is clearly trying to humour what she thinks is a not-all-there old woman before she makes a show of having some health problems.
'Cause you've been so good to poor old Granny, I'll share a secret with you.
People also need to think of the context in which this first Disney princess was created, the 1930s, the Great Depression. It's no coincidence that this adaptation adds these touches to Snow White's character that weren't in the original fairy tale.
We'll clean the house and surprise them. Then maybe they'll let me stay.
Her suddenly being impoverished and placed in an impossibly difficult situation would be extremely relevant and relatable to the average movie-going audience at the time, as would her offering a skill or service in exchange for shelter at the dwarf's cottage since she can't provide any money. And as for the cooking and cleaning, look at it from Snow's perspective. She's been made to clean the castle by her stepmother, and she guesses by the state of the cottage that the dwarfs either can't or don't have the time to clean it themselves. In fact, first assuming they're children with no mother to take care of them. So she sees they're in need of something, which just so happens to be one of the skills she has, and she proactively demonstrates that to earn her place there. She doesn't expect to get treated like a guest or have the dwarfs wait on her hand and foot. She wants to contribute and help them in exchange for helping her. And actually, people often forget that in these sorts of traditional settings, the home was the woman's domain, as in, women were in charge of running a household, and you can see the dwarves defer to her as soon as she's made part of their home.
March straight outside and wash, or you'll not get a bite to eat.
And as for dreaming of a prince to come and rescue her, well, it's a fantasy, one that's designed to be escapist for the audience. And in the 1930s, one way to escape such grinding poverty would be for a handsome prince to come along and marry you. And Snow isn't just wishing for any prince.
And she fell in love.
Was it hard to do?
It was very easy.
She specifically says
The one I love.
she wants love, clearly stemming from having no parents and an abusive stepmother. And there's nothing wrong with that. She doesn't want Princey for his money or status. She wants him because he's a good person who loves her.
Anyone could see that the prince was charming.
Obviously his role is very small, and most of the plans for him had to be reduced since the animators were having trouble with a realistic human male. But this was actually a subversion of the original fairy tale as well, where the prince only shows up at the end.
Oh!
Hello.
Oh!
Did I frighten you?
Here they meet beforehand, and Snow spends some time dreaming of him coming to find her. She's not idly waiting around for him, since she's busying herself making a new life in the dwarf's cottage, so she's dreaming while still being proactive. And I really can't stand the revisionist takes on this ending. The prince thinks she's dead and he comes to pay his respects. Look at it from this poor guy's perspective. He falls in love and then one day finds her gone from the place he expected her to be, and eventually hears of her death several months later. So saying goodbye to the woman you loved and never got the chance to be with will never not be beautifully heartbreaking to me. And since this is a quasi-musical and outright draws from opera as well, the prince is played by a tenor, which is always used to code an innocent, love-struck and somewhat naive character who is definitely good-hearted. So Snow White is falling in love with a dude because of his kindness and goodness. And outside of that, this movie has these elements of tolerance towards those who would be considered the outcasts of society. We get a very cute scene of Snow simply dancing and having fun with the dwarves, treating them as men and equals without making a big fuss about it, which one could argue emphasizes why she is the fairest of them all, rather than the evil queen. Next. I thankfully don't have to spend too long defending Princess Number 2 because, first, she is the result of Walt Disney trying to go for a very safe, audience-pleasing movie that would make a lot of money and therefore Snow White but more, so most of my defense about Snow already applies to Cinders. And second, out of all the Disney heroines, she's ranked second in terms of merch sales behind Elsa, and if you only go by the gals who are officially in the lineup, that makes her the most popular princess, at least in terms of how many people buy her stuff. And finally, there have been plenty of takes pointing out that Cinderella isn't anti-feminist, she's an abuse victim.
Oh yes, and the tapestries, and the draperies.
But I just finished.
Do them again!
What's only implied in Snow White, we see firsthand here, and the villain isn't some fairy tale queen with supernatural powers, just a wicked woman who hates her stepdaughter for no apparent reason.
Oh, please, you don't think that
Hold your tongue!
I admittedly do prefer the live-action remake for the backstory it adds to Lady Tremaine, but the animated version is fine too.
Above all, self-control. Yes!
Cinders, like Snow, is in an impossible situation that she can only get through by way of maintaining a positive attitude and finding things to love, such as the animals she makes friends with, and singing while she works. And contrary to what pop culture would have you believe, she's not actually sitting around dreaming about a prince. When the ball is announced and every maiden is to attend, her motivation is literally just to have a night off and get to dance and have fun. It's actually Drizella and Anastasia who want to marry the prince, and Cinders doesn't even know she's dancing with the guy when she gets there.
I haven't met the prince.
The prince? But didn't you?
In fact, the Disney adaptation adds another subversion to the fairy tale with a genius subplot, where Cinderella's mice friends make a dress for her to wear, using some of the stepsisters' old cast-offs, and she's ready to take her place at the ball, whether they like it or not. And in a fantastic but heartbreakingly cruel twist, the stepsisters destroy the dress, which, according to a deleted song, was also what her mother got married in. It's only then that the fairy godmother comes, in effect rewarding her for finding the courage to defy her family by giving her the chance to do so again.
It's more than I ever hoped for. Bless you, my child.
The Disney version also adds a third act twist where Lady Tremaine realizes that Cinderella is the girl the prince is looking for and locks her in the attic so she can't try on the slipper. But the mice and bird friends she'd spent the film treating with kindness despite her situation work to free her. And it's also her idea to get Bruno the dog to scare away Lucifer the cat.
Bruno.
So you see the narrative actively work to reward Cinderella for remaining a good person in spite of the mistreatment inflicted on her, which was very deliberate by Walt, who wasn't a fan of an earlier idea to have the fairy godmother show up again to unlock the door, and thought it meant more for her to be rewarded for the friendships she'd made. And a checkmate moment that never fails to make me smile, as well as yet another subversion. Lady Tremaine breaks the glass slipper before Cinderella can try it on, but then...
But you see, I have the other slipper.
It is not the best Disney movie, but it has plenty of moments, and Cinderella is far from a bad character. And I know it's impossible not to compare different versions, but I find pitting the animated version against the remakes a bit depressing, since it usually results in victim blaming one when they are both very different characters.
I don't understand it. I've tried to be kind to you.
You kind to me?
Yes.
I may prefer Lily James's Ella, but they're both good, and they're significantly better than the Amazon Cinderella, which is an example of why we should spend less time demonizing the Disney princesses, and more time shining the microscope on today's batch of nightmarishly awful heroines. Moving on. Okay, now you're getting me in spoiling for a fight mode.
How could I marry a prince? I'd have to be a princess. And you are, dear.
The last of the classic three princesses, and so the three most common arguments are no personality, damsel in distress, and non-consensual kiss. If you're going to accuse Aurora of having no personality, bless your heart because you've clearly sustained extensive brain damage.
You're really not supposed to speak to strangers. But we've met before.
Uncle Walt was forever trying to grow as an artist and storyteller, and Sleeping Beauty was intended to be his most artistically prestigious film yet, deviating from the princess formula that had been used in Cinderella and Snow White, and Aurora was envisioned to be less of an ingenue than those two.
I fooled them. I have met someone.
Aurora doesn't just dreamily sing about a handsome prince, she does it when she's told not to speak to strangers, meaning she's having forbidden fantasies, and is happy to roleplay with an owl, and not just sing sweetly, but also flirt and play coy.
When will I see you again?
Oh, never, never.
Never?
Well, maybe someday.
Snow White runs inside when her prince shows up, only coming out from behind a curtain and showing that she's into him when the song is over. Aurora, however, goes, "Oh, you want to play ball, buddy? Let's go." And she rebelliously shares a dance with a handsome stranger against the wishes of her aunts. But then, once the excitement is over, she sensibly makes arrangements to get to know Philip later, inviting him to her home, where she was expecting her three aunts to also be there so she could introduce them.
Where?
At the cottage, in the glen.
There are also a few little moments further demonstrating this, such as her knowing instantly that the three fairies are planning something for her birthday and playing along for the sake of the surprise, and Mary Costa's iconic work. You cannot accuse these expertly sung notes of having no personality. Hell, Aurora's the only princess who was supernaturally gifted with a beautiful singing voice, and Mary Costa makes you believe this talent was granted by a fairy godmother. And then we move to the damsel in distress criticism. Yeah, she's in distress, so what? That's what the fairy tale's about. Quoth the unshaved mouse, "If she saves herself, it's not Sleeping Beauty, it's She-Ra." And if you're going to attack the movie for being anti-feminist because there's a female character who needs to be rescued, you also have to acknowledge the screen time and plot significance given to 3 other female characters who are older and not conventionally attractive, while still being presented as strong and powerful with buckets of personality between them. Or that, Prince Philip also needs rescuing, and that the being they need rescuing from is also a woman, and hyped up as the most powerful person in the story.
The mistress of all evil.
So is it anti-feminist to need to be rescued from a woman by 3 other women? I'd argue that Maleficent is more sexist, since it uses the woman scorned trope, makes the 3 good fairies into idiots to prop up Maleficent, turns the first heroic Disney queen into a disposable woman who dies off screen, and actually makes Aurora more of an ingenue who needs constant supervision, rather than the hard-working street-smart girl from this version. But this is all subjective, and we really don't need to torture ourselves arguing over whether something counts as feminist or not to base our enjoyment on that. And then there's the kiss, which really did not need to be lampshaded in Maleficent, because it has always been such a non-issue, and anyone who tries to claim otherwise is likely projecting a lot.
When true loves kiss, the spell shall break.
While I sometimes get jaded at the state of the world and think a century-long siesta might be a decent idea, Aurora has a family waiting for her. Specifically 2 parents who haven't seen her in 16 years, and also a man whom she burst into tears over when she was told she couldn't see him again. And said man is the one kissing her to save her from an eternal coma. An article on the Mary Sue said it best. This is not a drunken accidental hookup, or an older male authority figure taking advantage of a younger co-worker. He's literally saving her from an eternity of sleep. Non-verbal consent is a thing, and Aurora gives Philip plenty of it in her body language when she's comfortable around him, and her reaction to Philip during her awakening. She is not upset about being kissed. She got kissed by someone she liked. She would have kissed him if she was awake. Also, I do like this little moment right before she pricks her finger.
Don't touch anything!
And it's open to enough interpretation to suggest that Aurora was actually strong enough to briefly fight off Maleficent's influence. Aurora also displays a lot of dignity and composure in how she learns that her entire life has been a lie, and now she's expected to marry some man she's never heard of and eventually run a kingdom, and yet still seems willing to go along with it and fulfill her duty in spite of how much pain it's causing her. And because she's the most unashamedly feminine of the princesses, the decades-long war against her has finally lessened now that the backlash towards what has been derisively called N-log feminism and the criticism of traditional femininity has led to people re-evaluating these more feminine archetypes, and Aurora actually seems to be enjoying a resurgence in popularity. She's 4th in my list of favourite princesses, and we'll segue to my number 1 now. I won't stay here too long because I've already done 2 videos talking about Ariel, even if one was from a time when I had no clue what I was doing, and I would skip over her completely if I didn't keep seeing memes and jokes about how when you watch the movie as an adult, you relate more to Triton and Ariel should just listen to her father. And if you're a parent and side with Triton in this situation, let me replace one word in these following lines.
You would have died!
One less
Black man.
to worry about.
Did we learn something? And someone else tried to throw that "she gives up her life for a man" punch on me recently, and I happily brought receipts.
You don't even know him!
Know him? I don't have to know him.
Like Cinderella and Snow White, Ariel is an abuse victim, albeit one where the abuser is regretful, and works to correct his behaviour once he's seen just how badly he messed up. And any bad decisions Ariel makes are frustratingly relatable, especially since Ursula has been watching her and lying in wait specifically to rush her into making one. And in my first video, I said that a flaw in the story was Ariel not appearing to learn enough from the ordeal or apologise enough, but I actually take that one back now. Ariel doesn't have to apologise for She got punished literally for a feeling, not an action, and because of that bad decision from her father, ended up in the clutches of a predator who was waiting for such a scenario. And for all the times I've heard her called a bad role model, here's a list of honourable things she does in the film. Saves a complete innocent from drowning even though she knows it risks her father's rage, also staying with him until she's sure he's alive, being open-minded about another culture, and trying to learn as much as possible about a world that's not her own, and trying to save someone who's been a victim of the same predator who went after her. There are worse fictional characters you could look up to.
Far better than any dream girl is one of flesh and blood. One warm and caring and right before your eye.
I feel like The Little Mermaid could be the litmus test for media literacy, and she gives up her whole life for a man is the instant fail answer. But there's another similar fail answer for our next princess. Yes, in 2024, we still have to defend a character created in 1991 against accusations of a made-up condition. Lindsay Ellis does a fantastic video breaking down why Beauty and the Beast is not about Stockholm Syndrome, so I'd recommend checking that one out, but I'll add my 2 cents as well. Stockholm Syndrome was named for an incident in the city of the same name, where a set of hostages came to trust their captors more than the police, actually hugged and kissed each other goodbye at the end of the situation, and they refused to testify against them. However, the psychiatrist who made up the term never actually met with any of the hostages, and just publicly declared they had been brainwashed by the syndrome specifically to deflect blame from the police, who were unnecessarily brutal in dealing with the hostage situation, outright rejecting a peaceful release plan set down by the captors that was specifically designed to ensure the safety of the hostages. One of them had a recorded phone call with the Prime Minister expressing worry that the police would storm the building and get a lot of people killed, to which the dude replied, "You will have to content yourself that you died at your post," giving them good reason not to trust the police. So yeah, made-up syndrome that was really a backhanded form of victim blaming. Let's move on to Belle, and unfortunately, this first pill will be a hard one to swallow. We are all going to do abusive things at some point in our lives. It's unavoidable. We're all a product of our environments, constantly learning and growing, especially while we're young. That's not to invalidate the hurt these things will cause, but what counts is how a person responds to boundaries and their accountability. So looking at Belle's situation, she agrees to stay in the castle in exchange for her father going free, and when the Beast sees how saddened she is by this, he does attempt to make it up to her by providing a room and saying she's free to explore the castle, and Belle does not immediately swoon over being given scraps when her entire world has been turned upside down, and stands up to the Beast when he demands that she join him for dinner.
You can't stay in there forever!
Yes, I can.
He threatens to break down the door and she doesn't budge. She's clearly not afraid of him, and so anything she does is entirely on her terms. She even goes into the West Wing when she knows he doesn't want her to, and seems to think defying him would be funny. And when he goes ballistic and she sees how out of control he is, what does she say?
Promise or no promise, I can't stay here another minute.
When she thinks her life is in danger, she leaves, and then the Beast saves her from wolves. She doesn't go back to the castle after some token nice gesture to keep her happy. He literally saves her life at great risk to his own, which sends quite a different message to her, since the kind of person who goes out of their way to rescue you from wolves after you ran out of their home terrified for your life is at least worth a second chance. And Belle also was likely thinking more pragmatically, since there doesn't appear to be another human around, and he would possibly die if she left him alone in the snow, and we can safely say that even after how he behaved, Belle is not the type of person to leave someone to die after they've just saved her life. And then look at their first conversation afterwards.
You hadn't have run away, this wouldn't have happened.
If you hadn't frightened me, I wouldn't have run away.
She has accountability for her actions, and then also challenges him to own up to his.
Well, you should learn to control your temper.
She doesn't shift blame, and also checks him on that temper, to which he is immediately receptive. Belle rewards this good behaviour by thanking him for saving her life, and he likewise then makes an effort with her, trying to eat breakfast the human way, and then Belle meets him halfway. The Beast never attempts to control Belle, force her to do anything she doesn't want, or even raise his voice to her again. Rather, once she shows him kindness, he feels compelled to do something chivalrous for her, and for anyone trying to snark he gave her a library he already had, I speak as a reformed bookworm. Trusting someone else with my books is a big deal. And of course, once the Beast realizes that Belle is still technically here because of the agreement, he properly sets her free as an act of love, expecting nothing in return.
Why? Because I love her.
Belle also doesn't feel pressured or manipulated, since she heads off to help her father instantly, and doesn't think of returning to the castle until she knows the Beast is in danger. And for people who claim that Belle is too static or doesn't have a complete character arc, someone else pointed out to me that it's subtle, but it's there.
Gaston, you are positively primeval.
Why, thank you, Belle.
When Gaston is harassing her at the beginning, she keeps her opinions to herself and tries to brush him off with politeness, similar to when she rejects him again at the planned wedding, again using trickery and indirectness to get him out of her hair. The first time she actually stands up for herself is when she's in the Beast's castle, and in her stay there, she becomes more assertive and doesn't have to play the nice game, as we call it. And the Beast respects her for stating her opinions and standing her ground, falling in love with her because of it. Her assertiveness compels him to improve his behaviour, and then when Gaston tries to have her father committed, she finally stands up to him and puts him in his place.
He's no monster, Gaston. You are.
And for people who complain that she's too passive in the climax, she doesn't need to be a badass or fight the villagers herself. She shows up to be there for the man she loves. She'd already come to the end of her arc, and her being there encourages the Beast once again.
Beast!
Belle.
I say all the time that Beauty and the Beast isn't my favourite Disney movie, but these last 10 minutes are just absolutely perfect.
You came back.
And it's Belle who breaks the enchantment by admitting her love out loud, which is given all the more power by the Beast dying believing it was better for her to not have to be saddled with him. And the curse breaking is the biggest indicator that she loved him wholeheartedly.
It is you!
And I know how it's fun to joke about how we prefer the Beast to the Prince, but another great thing about Belle is that she's neither blown away nor repulsed by the change in appearance, and instead looks to the eyes to confirm that it's him, showing that she is not shallow at all, and her love for him is not dependent on any part of his physical appearance, which unfortunately the remake shat all over by including that joke about him growing a beard, because portraying girlfriends as controlling the man's appearance is feminist apparently. And while we're on the remake, it misrepresents Belle by playing more to the pop culture idea of her as this Hermione figure that she never was.
Teaching another girl to read isn't one enough.
Hermione was not an aspirational character. Her book smarts stem from insecurities about wanting to be the best, and she actually alienates everyone because she's such a know-nothing know-it-all, not getting friends until she actually shows some compassion by covering for Harry and Ron. There are also other instances where Hermione is more concerned with forcing her opinions on people and prioritizing getting to say "I told you so," with even her attempts at standing up for the little guy being a sign of her arrogance and lack of self-awareness. Hell, Hermione herself admits that Harry is a better person than her because of his bravery and willingness to do the right thing.
Me, books, and cleverness are more important things.
Belle, however, is not some misguided rabble-rouser who goes for low-hanging fruit. She's actually quite a weirdo, since the lyrics of the song named after her include, "She really is a funny girl," and "She's nothing like the rest of us."
It's a pity and a sin, she doesn't quite fit in.
She reads fairy tales and dreams of having adventures, and if she were around today, she'd be reading manga and probably writing fanfiction. A deleted song reveals that Romeo and Juliet is her favourite play, and that's one a lot of intellectuals are quick to scoff at.
My sin is birth.
Belle has a lot more in common with Ariel, really, in that both of them are weird girls who find men that love them for their eccentricities, and the things that have them pegged as misfits in their communities. And although Belle isn't close to being my favourite princess, she really is a great character, and I can definitely understand why she's one of the most popular. But it's time for my second favourite. Fun fact, Jasmine is actually the only Disney princess in the official lineup that isn't the main character in her film. And we can credit my friend Song the Genius for making me realise that Aladdin is the rare thing known as a Disney prince film, and we could use more of that. So Jasmine is mainly seen through Aladdin's perspective and acts as a supporting character. But not every gal has to be the lead, and she's living proof that a supporting character can be iconic in her own right.
I'm a fast learner.
She's also Disney's first brown princess, and I would indeed call this good representation. The debate about Aladdin's cultural accuracy and Orientalism can never truly be answered, but take a look at the classic three princesses. Snow White has a 1930s bob in medieval Europe, and Aurora is outright said to be living in the 14th century, with her neckline resembling 1950s high fashion, so Jasmine having a historically inaccurate costume isn't exactly the exception here, and quickly debunking another myth, she's not actually 15 about to turn 16. That seems to be confusing an earlier draft that was nixed specifically because Jeffrey Katzenberg was disturbed by the idea of 15-year-olds being forced into marriage, since Ariel at least had a time skip to her wedding.
All says you must be married to a prince by your next birthday.
But going back to the notion of Disney princesses being quite subversive, Jasmine is actually the first of the princesses to have grown up in the palace setting, since Snow White and Aurora grew up in poverty, Cinderella and Belle married into royalty, and Ariel was a mermaid. And already in 1992, Disney was shedding some light on the difficulties a princess might face. Since Jasmine's father is pressuring her to marry, and she at one point nearly gets forced into an engagement with Jafar.
Then maybe I don't want to be a princess anymore.
Jasmine considers giving up that life and runs away, but in a very interesting twist, getting a taste of what a commoner goes through makes her realize the advantages of being a princess, and she's actually the first Disney princess we see attempt to use her authority to help those less fortunate, later affirming that she'll be staying in the palace to work within the system, which is motivated by learning that Jafar is undermining her father's authority to have innocent people executed. Also, he says,
"When I am queen, I will have the power to get rid of you."
But Jasmine also maintains her self-respect, as even though she's willing to marry to use the situation to her benefit, she won't just choose anyone.
How dare you? All of you, standing around deciding my future? I am not a prize to be won.
She gets this fantastic moment, and once again, an outspoken young woman who commands respect encourages a man to better himself to become worthy of her. This isn't like the toxic I can change him scenario in the 2019 Little Women, since Aladdin is already a good person just trying to be something he's not when he doesn't have to be, and he changes his behavior to respond to what Jasmine wants.
You aren't just some prize to be won. You should be free to make your own choice.
And while he does find her beautiful, it's not her princess status that makes him fall for her, but rather seeing her show kindness to a child on the street who can't afford food, and being impressed with how quickly she plays along to his ruse to fool the vendor.
I'm gonna go see the doctor.
Oh, hello, Doctor. How are you?
He falls for her personality, and quickly learns that she won't be won over with superficial trinkets that the genie conjures up. Like the Beast with Belle, Aladdin listens to what Jasmine actually says, remembering how she feels trapped, and taking her on an exciting magic carpet ride, making sure she herself enjoys the experience.
We could get out of the palace, see the world.
Jasmine, as the third 90s princess, also continues the blurring of the Madonna whore complex that Ariel had also done, since her default outfit was a seashell bra, but Jasmine has a whole sequence where Jafar forces her into his version of the slave Leia bikini in what TV Tropes calls go-go enslavement, which has got to be my second favourite trope name after Diamonds in the Buff. But Jasmine turns the situation to her advantage by tricking Jafar into thinking the genie has made her fall in love with him, and even kissing him to cause a distraction, making her the only princess to lock lips with the movie's villain. And although she ends up imprisoned in an hourglass for the finale, she does not fit the parameters for the dreaded damsel in distress label, since to qualify she'd have to be a complete innocent who has nothing to do with the conflict, and she was actively trying to get the lamp before Jafar, and had previously tried to fight him off, meaning she inserted herself into a combat situation. There was an early idea where she would break herself out of the hourglass using the jewel on her headband, but presumably that was changed when this red costume came into the picture. I kind of would have preferred Jasmine to free herself in this situation, since Aladdin does enough already in the climax, but you could argue that she in fact saves Aladdin afterwards.
That stupid law. This isn't fair. I love you.
The Sultan changes the law, causing all that conflict, meaning that Jasmine can now choose whichever husband she deems most worthy, and she happily looks past class differences and chooses Aladdin without hesitation.
I choose you.
Although I doubt anyone who isn't a sad human being would say this is presenting a woman as a trophy or reward, if anyone does try to say that, I offer up a counter-argument. This movie presents us with a poor street urchin with no family, no money, no castle, no room full of books, no ship or carriage, no weapons to kill wicked witches with, and of course, no title. Just himself, his kindness, and his goodness, as well as quick thinking in tight situations. And the movie says that he is just as worthy of being noticed and valued as any prince. The same way that, say, Cinderella did for the female lead. There were supposedly plans for a brother franchise to the Disney Princess line featuring these male heroes that got scrapped in favour of marketing the Marvel and Star Wars stuff to boys, which I can't help but think is a bit of a shame, since you would all be surprised if I said that out of all the princes, Philip from Sleeping Beauty is actually my favourite, and a franchise giving him a little more does give me thought. And while Disney has no shortage of male leads, we are still a little starved on good ones, specifically in the fairy tale films, since we have Aladdin, Philip, and I guess Flynn/Eugene, but I'm getting sidetracked here. So to reiterate, Jasmine, number 2 in my list of favourite Disney princesses, and coincidentally, number 3 is next. Another one I already did a video on back when I had no clue what I was doing, and another one where she gets overshadowed by a preference issue.
I love him, Father.
For some, the historical inaccuracy is a make or break situation, But as another friend put it recently, the debate about accuracy means that people overlook how great a character Pocahontas actually is.
Daughter, stand back.
I won't!
She's Disney's second brown princess, and the first to unambiguously be the lead of her movie, even drifting into risque territory involving interracial romance, as well as being voiced by an actress of the corresponding race. And I've often considered doing a list on the top, say, 25 voice performances in Disney films, with Robin Williams as the genie being my number 2, and Jodie Benson as Ariel being my number 1. You know who my number 3 would be?
This is the path I choose, Father. What will yours be?
Pocahontas is also a movie that has lots of discourse from people who haven't actually seen it, or at least aren't willing to look at it constructively, because some of the takes I've seen really misrepresent it. And here's the first big truth bomb. Pocahontas is not a white savior movie. For starters, which character is the film named after? Who is the main character? Yeah, we're introduced to John Smith in the English first, but we meet Eric before Ariel and Jafar before Aladdin, and there's no doubt who those movies are about. Avatar gets compared to Pocahontas a lot, but Jake is clearly the main character in the former, and Pocahontas is in the latter. We're shown the Na'vi through Jake's perspective, but the Powhatans through no one's perspective but their own. Pocahontas is the one who drives the story, and John reacts to her, with everything hinging on her feelings and motivations.
You have to stop them.
I can't.
John is the dude in distress for the third act, and it falls to Pocahontas to save him. About the only time a white character saves someone is John taking a bullet meant for Chief Powhatan, but again, that happens only after Pocahontas saves him, so we can give her the credit for that too. In fact, the movie's most famous song is Colors of the Wind, and what actually prompts Pocahontas to sing it?
Our houses are fine.
You think that, only because you don't know any better.
Pocahontas schools the ignorant white boy on his views, calls him on using a racial slur, and launches into a spectacular musical number showing him how her culture is just as valid as his. And guys, Pocahontas was on Team Bear. You could argue that Pocahontas is in fact a deconstruction of a white savior movie, since the English settlers are introduced having entitled views towards the New World specifically so the movie can prove them wrong. Remember Wiggins's line?
Why do you think those insolent heathens attacked us?
Because we invaded their land and cut down their trees and dug up their earth.
I never saw this movie's message as trying to present both sides as intolerant, although the defanged lyrics to Savages definitely don't help.
They're whole disgusting racist like a curse.
More so, Pocahontas' appeal to her father as a call to set an example and be the bigger person, to show they're not the savages they've been painted as, with the very valid point that innocent people are going to be hurt in any war situation, and that wars only happen because someone at the top is profiting from them.
They let him go. They don't want to fight.
It's a trick, don't you see?
A very simplified version since it's Disney, but still not a terrible message, all things considered.
Look around you. This is where the path of hatred has brought us.
Pocahontas herself also gets misremembered as a one-dimensional, airy-fairy sort who plays the Indian maiden trope absurdly straight, which again seems to come from people who either didn't watch the movie or only saw it once.
The tree is talking to me.
Then you should talk back.
First of all, Pocahontas has a very childish, playful side, and is seen as somewhat unusual even by her best friend, who by the way we also love. Moment of appreciation for Nakoma.
What are you doing here?
I had to see you again.
There's also quite a lot of comedy in her I Want song that's mined from just how clueless she is that her joyriding is terrifying poor Miko, and the first bit of conflict with her character is dismay at being expected to marry someone more serious, and therefore have to give up her fun-loving lifestyle. And one could even interpret her following John at first to be motivated by seeing whether she could leave her tribe and join them for a different life, only then realizing she prefers it among the rest of the Powhatans when she sees how the English view her and the rest of her people, after which she suggests that John stay with her.
I've never really belonged anywhere.
You could belong here.
Pocahontas also gets angry more than once throughout the movie, first in the aforementioned scene where John disrespects her culture, and later when Thomas shoots Kocoum, where John has to restrain her from attacking him right back.
He
killed him!
She also goes to pieces in the third act, best underlined in the deleted song If I Never Knew You, which I consider canon, where she's allowed to be vulnerable so John can reassure her for a change.
So dry your eyes.
And I will always find the climax epic, where Pocahontas runs through the crowd and puts herself between John and her father to stop the execution.
If you kill him, you'll have to kill me too.
This gal prevents an entire war by appealing to her father as a daughter, and also proves that she doesn't care what happens to her, as she will not stand by and let an innocent person be killed, especially since Kocoum got killed himself because he attacked John just for kissing her, and even knocked Pocahontas to the ground when she tried to intervene. And with the tensions between both sides at their highest, she bravely declares that she loves John, who we should also remind ourselves challenged the others when they tried to call the Powhatans savages.
There's no room for their kind in civilized society.
But this is their land!
She doesn't just fall in love with the first white man she sees. She falls for a man who demonstrates kindness to animals, shows that he can change his views when shown another perspective, and will also stand up for her in light of peer pressure. She falls for a man with integrity, and he does likewise. And for all the PR nonsense about how the next version of Snow White won't be sitting around dreaming about her prince and instead will be trying to become the leader she knows she can be, Disney already had a princess who did just that, who in fact chose not to be with the man she loved because her people needed her more.
I'm needed here.
Pocahontas is a fantastic character, and Irene Bedard's performance is equally great. Unfortunately, how many leading roles has she had in mainstream films since then? Pocahontas still remains one of the only Hollywood films with an Indigenous woman as the main character, with there not being another until arguably The New World in 2005, which was another Pocahontas story, in which Irene plays her mother this time, and even more recent instances like Prey and Killers of the Flower Moon still feeling quite rare. And Disney's version sticks out because Pocahontas at least gets to be a fun character who does cool things and saves the day, with the narrative not being completely about colonialism and oppression. And while I doubt any exec would have the guts to sign off on a live-action remake, it would provide an opportunity for a young Indigenous actress the same way the animated one did for Irene Bedard back in the 90s, and at least she's had repeated work voicing Pocahontas as part of the Disney Princess franchise. And hey, we've already covered moments like this.
Pocahontas is actually one of my most favorite Disney characters. Not only because finally they had a princess that kind of looked like me.
So the existence of this character seems to spell out more good for the world than bad.
What do you say to a tree?
Anything you want.
The same can definitely be said for... I feel like I don't need to defend Mulan so much as debunk a lot of misrepresentations surrounding her, although some of them complain about her being in the Disney Princess franchise to begin with, so it's a very relevant debate.
The flower that blooms in adversity is the most rare and beautiful of all.
For gals who are far more tomboyish than outright nerdy, Mulan tends to be their favourite, and it used to be a personal running gag in my life that I would joke to these people, someone doesn't like women. Mulan often gets hailed as the best princess because, quoting one lady from about 10 years ago, she's the only one with balls. You see, Mulan became something of a figurehead for N-logs and anyone who hates traditional femininity, since her storyline involves disguising herself as a man so she can fight in the war, making her a sort of PG G.I. Jane, complete with important haircut scene. So how dare Disney label her a princess, which is such a girly title, and therefore imply that she's like one of those weak girly girls who sit around singing about princes wearing sparkly dresses and having to be saved by men. Interestingly enough, this misunderstanding can be best understood in the difference between A Song of Ice and Fire Arya Stark and Game of Thrones Arya. The book version doesn't necessarily hate feminine things so much as wishing they weren't forced on her because she's no good at them, especially when she has an older sister who's far better at that sort of thing that everyone compares her to. The show version begins in a similar way, but by season 2 she gets lines like this.
Most girls are idiots.
Mulan doesn't necessarily hate feminine things, since she wears 3 different dresses throughout the movie, and she in fact wants to make her family proud, even tweaking the makeover she gets for the matchmaker to suit her preferences. The issue is that Mulan is worried she will dishonor her family by not being good at the things expected of her. The story is very heavily influenced by Chinese traditions of filial piety, in other words, showing love and respect for your parents.
Mulan, you dishonor me.
Mulan doesn't hate femininity or think girly girls are stupid. Rather, she realizes how much work goes into being a good wife and has a massive heaping of imposter syndrome, not comprehending how much her father truly loves her and is proud of her for what she's already good at.
The greatest gift and honor is having you for a daughter.
It's very similar to Jo from Little Women, which is why I can't get behind the ending Greta Gerwig gives her in the 2019 film. She didn't hate marriage, but rather feared the loss of her independence, which is solved by finding a man who's an intellectual match for her and values her for who she already is. And that's another thing I want to focus on when people go on about how Mulan is the most badass Disney princess, or the only strong one. Mulan's biggest virtue isn't her physical strength, but her cleverness. She's already come up with a system to make doing her chores easier, with her main flaw being that she's sometimes too impulsive, which is what leads to her making a spectacle of herself with the matchmaker. And when she's failed so badly at training she's told to just go home, her cleverness helps her realize how to retrieve the arrow and earn Shang's respect. Likewise, when they're facing the entire Han army with only one cannon left, it's Mulan's idea to use the cannon to cause an avalanche that wipes out the majority of their enemies. And that's how she defeats Shan Yu at the end.
You don't have a plan?
Hey, I'm making this up as I go.
Oh, and the way she disarms him? That's an actual martial arts technique that someone on the production team knew, so they just added it in. And as said earlier, Mulan fails multiple times. She's allowed to mess up and be terrible at things she hasn't tried yet, but she applies what she already has and achieves success by working for it. Female characters just don't normally get to have those stories, because they're either written by men who are afraid of being called sexist if they show a female character with any apparent flaw, or by women working through some shit. Mulan is not a good character because she kicks names and takes butt, although that is very fun to watch too. She has a journey that's very relatable, and manages to be both affirmational and aspirational, putting the message forth that the screw-up with imposter syndrome can be the hero if they want. And for all the bad faith takes that say Mulan had to become a man to succeed, she doesn't truly save the day until she's wearing a dress, which is actually a departure from the original, where she successfully keeps her disguise until the war is over and her comrades don't find out she's a woman until they visit her later. And again, her cleverness is something she already had before she disguised herself.
Mulan, what's this?
Notes? In case I forget something?
Then there's the weird take that her turning down a position on the Emperor's Council is implying that women shouldn't have too much power, which, borrowing one of Liana's quotes, is such projection it may as well be The Dark Knight in IMAX.
I think I've been away from home long enough.
It's more empowering if she just doesn't go back to be with the father she joined the army to save. Ariel gets shit for leaving home and Mulan gets it for going back, even though it's what both characters want. While Hercules giving up his godhood for Meg is considered noble? Projection. Besides that, Mulan returning home also solves the conflict she had at the start about being a good wife, and potentially dishonoring the family.
You don't meet a girl like that every dynasty.
Now that she's a war hero and been given the highest honor from the Emperor, it's safe to say she ain't gonna have a problem finding a husband now, even with Shang already being interested in her, which is what Mulan wanted. She gets a man who respects her and views her as an equal, and the movie even subversively leaves it a little open, by not showing a wedding or a big dramatic kiss, but instead Mulan asking him to stay for dinner and letting our minds decide where they go from there.
Would you like to stay forever?
I've noticed that it's Mulan in addition to Belle who gets projected onto the most by people clearly lacking in self-validation, kind of like when Harry Potter fans flip the f*** out over Hermione wearing a pink dress to the Yule Ball, as opposed to the blue outfit from the books. Mulan wore 3 different dresses in the movie, the other princesses stood up for what they believed in, and all of them demonstrated strength in their own ways. It's not an insult for Mulan to be included as a Disney princess, even though we know the main reason she's in the line is to make it look more diverse. Rather, having Mulan in the lineup sends the message that there are different types of strength, and that princess can mean something different to everyone. So I'm officially on the side that favors Mulan being considered a Disney princess.
You fight good.
Before I move on to the final princess, I also just want to sing the praises of several heroines who didn't get included in the lineup, but are really great characters anyway.
Can you stand on your head?
Disney's Alice will forever be my favourite iteration of the character, and Catherine Beaumont's vocal performance is truly as iconic as those of the princesses.
But didn't you just say? Oh dear.
Even though I'm not one of the Black Cauldron's defenders, I can appreciate Princess Eilonwy, who was also designed by Glenn Keane, who's responsible for my favourite princess. Esmeralda isn't just Demi Moore's finest hour as an actress, yes, including G.I. Jane, but she is probably one of Disney's top 10 characters of all time.
You speak of justice, yet you are cruel to those most in need of your help.
Silence!
Justice!
Meg, likewise, is so good I consider Hades the second most appealing thing about Hercules, and as I always say, Susan Egan kills this role.
How cute. A couple of rodents looking for a theme park.
Jane from Tarzan is also very underrated, and Minnie Driver is just magnificent.
I'm in a tree with a man who talks to monkeys.
And long before Elsa made headlines for supposedly becoming the first princess to ascend to queen status in a Disney movie, we have this lady from Atlantis: The Lost Empire, which is a movie I have to do a video on one day, and following tradition, voiced by the legendary Cree Summer in my favourite of her roles.
Milo.
Nani is also an unsung heroine along with Lilo, and then we get to... Tiana was not only the first princess created after the line was established, and therefore the first to be formally inducted into it, but she also sprang into existence after the internet became widespread, and 2000 cynicism meant that it was open season on Disney for sending horrible messages to children, especially girls. And with Tiana being the first African American princess, she was under twice as much scrutiny.
This could be a little better.
The film was dogged by criticism from the beginning, including the New Orleans setting being an insult to the victims of Hurricane Katrina, the use of a voodoo witch doctor as the villain, and even the original Frog Princess title being seen as offensive to the French. Tiana herself was a magnet for every criticism under the sun, not limited to her plan name Maddie sounding too similar to Mammy, and her initially going to be a chambermaid rather than a waitress, leading to them hiring Oprah Winfrey as a consultant for damage control, and casting her as the voice of Tiana's mother.
Well, you wish on that star, sweetheart.
Not helping matters was the clear attempt to avoid controversy by making the movie's prince ambiguously brown-skinned with green eyes, an Indian name, voiced by a Brazilian actor, and hailing from a fictional country when the movie is quite clearly set in 1920s Louisiana. For those who don't remember, this was the era of a movie like Hitch having to cast Eva Mendes as Will Smith's love interest, because a white actress would supposedly turn audiences away, and a black actress would make it a black movie. So you can already tell that Disney was walking a very thin line creatively, especially with it not mattering that most of the memes about their past films were misrepresenting them.
You gotta help it along with some hard work of your own.
They would get slightly better at working with this, since although Moana is very safe from a writing point of view, and a little cliched, the music still has a lot of flair, the story is about her discovering great things about her culture, and how Lee Carvalho gives it her all.
This is not who you are.
While Anika Noni Rose is good in the role, she's not given much material to really stand alongside the other princesses, because the movie is so concerned with pandering to the critics. So much so that Tiana's I Want song is a 3-minute lecture on working hard, and she stops in the middle of another scene after she's made her mistake to again preach to the audience, or more specifically, the folks who sustain themselves on bad faith criticism.
The only way to get what you want in this world is through hard work.
At least when Pocahontas and Esmeralda preached, it was for an issue that was actually relevant. Tiana is responding to a criticism and an outrage that was never truly a thing. Snow White literally cleaned an entire house and cooked dinner for 7 people the same day she was told she had to run for her life because her stepmother wanted her dead. Cinderella worked herself to exhaustion every day. Aurora clearly contributed to the cottage she lived in. Ariel saved an innocent person's life. Belle is shown maintaining her home. Jasmine specifically tried to use her authority as a princess to make things better in the kingdom. Pocahontas stopped a war. Mulan won a war. All the princesses worked hard in their own ways. And while you could argue that Tiana's arc is in fact learning that she doesn't have to work herself to the bone, her growth is extremely minimal and shallow. In fact, both her and Naveen have the same mistake from a writing point of view, in that they have these flaws they need to overcome, but these flaws aren't what creates the story's conflict. Naveen looking for the easy way out isn't what turns him into a frog. Facilier offers him a classic Faustian bargain, but Naveen never accepts, and he's basically just mugged. Tiana's obsession with hard work also isn't what turns her into a frog, since she kisses Naveen under the belief that he'll give her the money she needs to open her restaurant. And also, the lesson that she needs love is mangled by the fact that she wouldn't have met Naveen if she hadn't kissed him, and that she still gets the restaurant she wanted anyway. Her motivation is to work hard to make her father proud, and she thinks getting a restaurant he wanted is the way to do that.
Your daddy may not have gotten the place he always wanted, but he had something better.
She learns that her father not getting the restaurant didn't matter to him because he had a wife and daughter he loved, and apparently a community that we only see one brief snippet of. But when Tiana learns this and pursues Naveen,
My dream wouldn't be complete without you in it.
In effect giving up the material object she tied her identity to, she's still rewarded with it anyway. The character arcs in this movie are just very messy, and if it had spent less time hitting off a bunch of touch points and actually fine-tuning the story, And even then, I'm just not a fan of bossy wannabe girl boss learning to loosen up but still having it both ways and falling for a womanizer that made her kiss him under false pretenses as a character arc. And yes, it is quite conspicuous that Disney's first black princess is also the first princess to spend the majority of the movie turned into an animal that also conceals what race she is. Not to mention that the movie, designed to be a milestone of including a black princess, made the most entertaining character the white best friend.
I read about true love and fairy tales and... Tia, you found it.
I don't necessarily think Tiana's a bad character or even bad representation, since she is beautifully designed and carefully given visibly black features, as opposed to, say, Jasmine being drawn to just be Middle Eastern Jennifer Connelly. And I think Almost There is an alright song, but she's the bullet points. I don't think Tiana just represents the beginning of a frustrating new trend that we would really see polluting the live-action remakes and having a heroine criticize non-issues that weren't even present in earlier Disney films, but she also feels like a missed opportunity. She's Disney's first princess that isn't subversive. John Musker and Ron Clements conceived Tiana as someone who would never have been a fan of Disney fairy tales, which may have been a well-meaning choice with the first black princess, but it ends up playing to the cliches of black girls being automatically smarter, less innocent, and more mature in what's called adultification. Like how it's Susie Carmichael in the Rugrats, who initially starts out being a very typical 3-year-old, but then evolves into someone very smart and mature for her age, and is used to contrast with how spoiled and immature Angelica is. Kerry Washington later said that the reason she took the thankless role of a woman in peril in Django Unchained was because so few movies had that sort of fairy tale theme where a black woman is this idealized figure a man loves so much he'd go to hell and back just to rescue her. I already talked about how Pocahontas actually broke stereotype in terms of the chief's daughter and Indian maiden tropes, and Mulan did likewise with the Lotus Blossom and Dragon Lady tropes. Tiana, unfortunately, is just very safe and sometimes even bland. Like, the movie's big climax between her and Facilier is actually the first time they interact in the whole story.
Think of all those naysayers who doubted you.
They seem to know of each other, but there is zero connection between them, and Facilier isn't even tied to Tiana's main conflict. Brave got way more criticism than was arguably warranted, but you can't say that Merida didn't have a complete character arc that was actually subversive, in that it deconstructed the rebellious princess and had more of a focus on political intrigue rather than adventure. Everyone loves Tangled, and part of that is because Rapunzel is a 3-dimensional character, with the movie leaning into what it might be like to be raised by the Wicked Witch and be tricked into thinking she loves you. And while Frozen has its issues, Anna and Elsa are characters I just love. I was one of those annoying stans who had to play Let It Go on a loop, but let it also be said that I fell in love with Kristen Bell in the last part of For the First Time in Forever. But again, once we get to Moana, we have some very safe heroines that just gave me lots of Disney fatigue. And so much so that the last Disney movie I saw in cinemas was Frozen 2, and I still haven't seen Raya and the Last Dragon, but I've read enough discourse that tells me I really don't want to. But I do step out of line with the discourse regarding certain other princesses, so give me time. And I've way more than outstayed my welcome on this topic, so let's bring this magic carpet in for a steady landing. I like to joke about how I've had a chip on my shoulder regarding this topic for several years, pretty much ever since I went onto internet message boards and was told over and over about how Ariel was a bad role model, Belle had Stockholm Syndrome, Pocahontas was a Mary Sue, Mulan was too good to be labelled princess, and the classic 3 were anti-feminist and therefore must be condemned. And I bought into some of it, with the gaslighting having enough of an effect on me that I was like, sure, that message in Frozen.
You can't marry a man you just met.
I'd resigned myself to grudging acceptance that the memes and bad faith comedy articles would overwrite the actual movies in the minds of the general public, but I remember growing really fatigued by the time Gal Gadot was doing press for the Wonder Woman movie, and excitedly talking about how her daughter would be looking up to Diana rather than the Disney princesses, which becomes extremely yikes in hindsight of what that character does in the second movie. And these days, my empathy for the princess hate has officially run out. And because Disney to this day is still dead set on pandering to this bad faith criticism and trying to cast a wide net of appealing to everyone, I, who happily became a Disney adult when Frozen revived my interest all those years ago, have not watched a single animated film by them or Pixar since December 2019. And from reading the discourse surrounding Wish, that's not likely to change anytime soon. But I mean, I can complain about current Disney all I want, and it's fun to roast the remakes, but I'll just say what comes to mind whenever someone complains about the remakes ruining their childhood and tarnishing the originals. They don't erase the originals from existence, and if anything, they make the originals stand out even more, by virtue of demonstrating everything they did better. And ask anyone who their favourite princess is, and you will get a different answer, with me also being told of a fun game where you could tell a lot about someone based on who their favourite is. And of course, I don't mean to invalidate anyone who connects to the recent princesses more than the classic ones, because, after all, as much as the bad faith argument tries to portray the franchise as something harmful or dangerous, we can't ignore that the princesses are all very distinct, from different backgrounds and cultures, and with varying personalities and lifestyles. And even if I think Tiana is the weakest one, although from what I've read I imagine Rhea might fill that category, it's mainly because her predecessors set the bar so high. If nothing else, we can all agree that they've never had a miss in terms of casting, with even a celebrity voice actress like Mandy Moore being absolutely perfect as Rapunzel. And while Disney might be going through a bit of an artistic slump right now, with this current one being especially unusual, there's bound to be another princess sometime in the future, and I'm not going to say she has big shoes to fill, whether they be made of glass or not. I'll just say, whatever she brings to this 100-year legacy, it better be positive. And if you're one of those parents who won't let their children watch Disney princess movies because they're supposedly harmful or anti-feminist, don't be surprised when they start rebelling by eating the forbidden pixie dust covered fruit and see certain similarities between you and certain characters.
How dare you defy me?
But this has been an overlong saltfest immaturely criticizing people for not liking the same things as me, and me white knighting for strong, independent women who don't need no man, and quite literally in the case of Pocahontas. So I salute all the princesses, and say, you're all queens to me, even the ones Disney didn't include.